She slapped me next to my grandmother's casket, hard enough to draw blood. The organ music droned, mixing with the scent of wilting lilies. My father just stood there, cold as stone. "This isn't the time," he said. I thought I was alone, but the church security camera, the papers at the bank, and the audio recorder in my funeral jacket were already on my side. "My name is Rowan Blake. I am 32 years old, and my job is to calculate the precise cost of disaster. I am a risk analyst for Northline Atlas Logistics in Chicago, a company my grandmother, Evelyn, helped build. I spend my days modeling the probability of failure, supply chains breaking, ships sinking, markets collapsing. I predict the cracks before they become chasms. I am good at my job, but I had failed to predict this. The drive home from Chicago was a descent, pulling me from the sharp, clear air of the city into the damp, heavy atmosphere of my hometown, a place I had run from, a place that held the mortgage on my father's spine. Evelyn was gone. The summons had been curt, a text from my father. Grandma passed, funeral Friday. The First Presbyterian Church hadn't changed. It still smelled of old varnish, wax, and the suffocating, sweet rot of dying lilies. The organist played a low, droning chord that vibrated in my teeth, a sound of manufactured sorrow. And in the center of it all, directing the performance, was Marla Dane. My father's wife, not my stepmother, never that. She was dressed in sharp, expensive black silk, a stark contrast to the worn pews. She wasn't grieving, she was producing. Her voice, a theatrical stage whisper, sliced through the heavy air, assigning grief its seating chart. No, the Millers sit there, fourth row. They were only neighbors. For heaven's sake, she adjusted a spray of white roses, her movements quick and annoyed, as if the flowers had offended her. And the lighting on the casket is too harsh. Can someone soften it? It looks washed out. She was directing the flow of sorrow, curating the mourning, ensuring she was the star of a tragedy she clearly did not feel. I watched her scan the room, her eyes ticking off attendees like items on an inventory sheet. This was not a memorial. It was a hostile takeover. I was scheduled to give the eulogy, Evelyn had asked me to, months ago. "You see things clearly, Rowan," she'd said, her voice thin but her grip strong. "Don't let them muddy the water." I clutched the folded pages of my speech and headed for the vesting room, the small, cold space behind the chancel where the speakers were supposed to gather. It smelled of dust and old hymnals. Marla was there, facing away from me, speaking to the pastor. And absolutely no impromptu speeches. This must be dignified. "Marla." She turned. The practiced mask of the grieving widow was gone, replaced by flat, cold annoyance. "Rowan, you're late." "I'm here to speak. Where am I in the order?" She picked up the laminated program from the lectern and waved it dismissively. "Oh, darling, it was just too frantic. We had to make some cuts. It's just family and the pastor now. You understand." I looked at the program. My name was gone. "You removed it," I said. It wasn't a question. "I streamlined it. This isn't the time for—" She looked me up and down. "Complications. I'm her granddaughter. Evelyn asked me to speak." "Evelyn," Marla said, stepping closer, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper, "isn't here anymore. You think you can just breeze back in from Chicago, after ignoring this family for months, and take center stage? You are a disruptor. Rowan, you always have been. I'm here for my grandmother, not for you." I saw the shift. The muscles in her jaw tightened. The director vanished, replaced by something raw and territorial. "She is gone," Marla hissed, and I didn't see the hand move. It was fast, fueled by a rage that was shockingly pure. The crack of her palm against my cheek echoed, louder than the organ, in the small, dead space of the room. My head snapped back. My ear rang. I tasted the sharp, metallic tang of copper. Before I could react, she grabbed the shoulders of my black funeral jacket. Her nails dug into the fabric, pinching the skin beneath. "This is my house now, my family. You have no part here. Do you understand me? The door opened. My father, Richard Blake, stood in the doorway. He looked gray, diminished, a man perpetually apologizing for the space he occupied. He saw it all in one glance. Marla's hands on me, her face contorted, the bright bead of blood welling on my lip. He didn't move toward me. He didn't ask what happened. He didn't even look me in the eye. He looked past me, at her. He raised a placating hand and touched Marla's arm, rubbing the silk sleeve as if soothing a spooked horse. "Marla," he said, his voice tired. "This isn't the time." That was all. Not, "What did you do?" Not, "Are you okay, Rowan?" Just a quiet, desperate plea for the scene to end. He was managing the situation, not the violence. He was de-escalating her, not defending me. The betrayal was a cold, sharp thing, worse than the slap. Marla released me, shoving me back a step. As she did, her shoulder brushed my coat, and I felt the small, hard rectangle in my breast pocket. The mini recorder. I'd brought it to practice the eulogy, driving down. I'd hit record to listen to my own voice, to make sure I could get through the poem without breaking. I'd shoved it in my pocket, still running, when I'd first seen Marla in the narthex. My hand slipped into the pocket, fingers shielding the small, glowing red light. It was still on. It had captured everything. The hissed argument, the sharp, wet sound of the slap, and my father's final, damning words. I felt the blood drip onto my chin and wiped it away with the back of my hand. I looked past them, up at the corner of the ceiling, a small, black dome, a security camera, aimed right at the doorway. A silent witness. Without a word, I turned and walked out of the room, past my father, who still hadn't looked at me. I sat in the front pew, the one Marla had reserved for immediate family. I could feel her stare burning into the back of my head. Great Aunt Merrill, Evelyn's oldest living cousin, slid in beside me. She smelled of mothballs and strong peppermint. She took my hand in her dry, papery one. "She loved you, Rowan, more than any of them." She leaned in, her voice a fragile whisper. "Don't let them do this." "Do what, Merrill?" "The will, child. I saw a draft 2 months ago. Evelyn was sharp as a tack. She left the trust to you, to manage. She left the house to your father, but protected. Now." She shook her head. "It's all changed. They had her sign a new one, right at the end." She paused, her grip tightening. And it wasn't her handwriting. My phone vibrated in my pocket. A text from my cousin. B. She was the black sheep, the one who saw everything. The message just said, "Rowan, this looks wrong." Attached was an image, blurry, taken in the low light of a hospital room, a document titled "Durable Power of Attorney," and at the bottom, a signature, Evelyn Blake. But it wasn't. It was a weak, jagged line, a signature of a hand being pushed, or a mind fogged by drugs. It was a forgery, a bad one. I looked from the photo to the large, framed portrait of Evelyn near the casket. It was her 70th birthday photo, where she looked regal and sharp, but it was wrong. It was tilted, just slightly, to the left. I stood up. I heard Marla hiss, "Rowan, sit down," from the pew behind me. I ignored her. I walked to the portrait and straightened it. As my fingers touched the heavy gilt frame, I felt it, the back panel, small, fresh scratches along the bottom edge, where a fingernail or a flathead screwdriver had recently pried it open. Someone had wanted something from behind that photo, and they had been in a hurry. Just then, the service ended, the final amen was spoken, and the heavy bronze church bell began to toll, a slow, mournful peal that shook the stained glass. It wasn't an ending, it was a starting bell. I swore, right there, smelling the lilies and the wax, that this bell was tolling for them. I left through the side door, avoiding the receiving line, the performance of sorrow. The air outside was cold, cutting through my jacket. Sam, the old parking attendant who had worked this lot for 30 years, tipped his cap. "Miss Blake, a terrible business. Your grandmother was a fine woman." "She was, Sam, thank you." He leaned in, lowering his voice, even though we were alone among the gravel and the headstones. "Strange business, too." My stomach tightened. "What's strange?" "I saw your father. And her." He nodded toward the church. "Down at the Prairie State Bank, the main branch, the day after Evelyn was admitted to the hospital. They weren't there for the lobby. They were headed for the vaults. They looked urgent. The bank, the scratched frame, the shaky signature, the whispers. Rowan." Marla was walking toward my car, her public face of grief firmly back in place, but her eyes were glacial. "I saw you," she said, her voice low, straightening the picture, meddling, just like you always do. She stopped 3 feet from me. "This is your only warning. Go back to Chicago. Evelyn is gone. What she left is now my responsibility. Don't you dare touch her money. Don't you dare question what is mine." She smiled, a thin, terrible motion of her lips. "I will crush you." I looked at her. The risk analyst in my head was already running the numbers. The variables were clicking into place. The audio file in my pocket, the camera in the ceiling, the forged signature on my phone, the bank visit, the scratched frame. The probability of failure was high, for her. I tasted the blood on my lip one last time. "Then we start with the ledgers." I didn't go back to Chicago. I couldn't. The adrenaline from the confrontation had solidified into a cold, dense certainty. Grief was a luxury I would have to schedule for later. Marla had declared war, and my father had chosen his side. They thought they were fighting a grieving granddaughter. They were about to fight a risk analyst. I checked into a sterile hotel on the highway, a place with no memories. I set up my laptop on the cheap desk, the hum of the ice machine in the hall my only soundtrack. My job is to see the architecture of a disaster. I find the single point of failure that brings the whole system down. Marla and my father had built a system, and I was going to find the load-bearing wall. The entire system was built on one foundation, the Blake Harbor Trust. My grandmother, Evelyn, was not just the matriarch of our family. She was a founder, decades ago. She and her partner had started Blake Harbor Trust. It wasn't just some vanity project. It was a powerful local scholarship fund, a community pillar, but its real power, its teeth, came from its primary asset, a significant foundational block of voting shares in Northline Atlas Logistics, my company. Evelyn had ensured the trust would always have a voice in the company she helped build, and that the company, in turn, would always fund the community it came from. It was elegant. It was protected. It was supposed to be mine to manage. Evelyn had drilled me on its bylaws since I was in college. "It's a fortress, Rowan," she'd said, "but even a fortress needs a good steward." My laptop booted up. My first search was not on Google. It was on the county probate court's online records. There it was, filed exactly 3 months ago. A change in the durable power of attorney for both medical and financial decisions, and a new advanced healthcare directive. The designated agent had been me, Rowan Blake. The new agent was Marla Dane. This was the key. This was the weapon Marla had used to gain access to everything before Evelyn's death. The will itself wouldn't be filed for probate yet, but the POA was the master key that allowed her to change what was left for the will to distribute. I moved to the next link in the chain. My father, Richard, was the administrator of the trust, a title Evelyn gave him to manage the day-to-day scholarships, a role with limited power. He couldn't sell assets or change the structure, but with Marla holding a full financial POA, I accessed the trust's public filings. The scholarship disbursements looked normal, but then I cross-referenced with the Prairie State Bank's corporate registry. There, filed 2.5 months ago, just weeks after the POA was signed, were 2 new entities, Blake Harbor Bridge Fund 1 and Blake Harbor Bridge Fund 2. They were structured as temporary holding accounts. The authorization to open them, linking them to the main trust, was signed by my father as administrator, but the signature was wrong. It wasn't his confident, looped cursive. It was tight, hesitant. It was a signature under duress, or a forgery meant to look like his. These bridge accounts were designed to do one thing: move money out of the fortress. I pulled up the digital copy of the Trust's original charter. I knew it by heart. Article 4. Section 2. Any fundamental change to the asset structure or designation of controlling agents requires the signatures of two fully independent witnesses and must be accompanied by a letter of cognitive capacity assessment from a licensed physician, should the founder be over the age of 80. Evelyn was 82. Two independent witnesses, a capacity assessment. Marla wouldn't have just overlooked that. She would have found a way to fake it. The hospital. I called the records department at St. Jude's, my voice calm, professional. I was the next of kin. Just checking on final billing, I asked for the medication administration record for her final stay. It was a simple request. They emailed the PDF within 20 minutes. I opened the file. My grandmother had been on light sedatives for anxiety. A low, consistent dose. Standard procedure. I scrolled through the dates. 3 months ago, the day the POA was signed. That morning, her dose had been tripled. It was flagged in the system with a note. Patient agitated, per family request, per Marla's request. The signature on the POA wasn't just shaky from age. It was shaky from a chemical fog. The capacity assessment, if one even existed, was worthless. I remembered the scratches on the back of Evelyn's portrait. What was she hiding in there? A letter? The original will? Marla must have known about it, and with the POA in hand, she could have marched into the house and torn it apart. Then, the lakefront property, a quiet, wooded plot of land Evelyn had cherished, a place she'd planned to donate to the town as a nature preserve. An email from the local realtor popped up in my inbox, part of a town newsletter. Prime lakefront property, motivated seller. A link to the listing. The owner was listed as the Evelyn Blake Estate. Marla wasn't just redirecting funds, she was liquidating, turning Evelyn's most personal, sentimental assets into fast, untraceable cash. This was too clean, too organized. This required legal help. Evelyn had used the same family lawyer, Arthur Abernathy, for 50 years, a man of quiet integrity. I searched his name. The local paper had an article from 4 months ago. Arthur Abernathy announces sudden retirement. It cited unexpected health reasons. It was abrupt, too abrupt. I searched the trust's new filings again. The legal counsel of record was a new firm, Kepler and Firth. I didn't recognize the name. A quick search of state bar records and social media told me everything. Alan Firth was a college acquaintance of Marla's. He specialized in boutique estate planning, a polite term for finding loopholes to protect new money. She had isolated Evelyn, replaced her lawyer, drugged her, forged her signature, and she'd done it all under the cover of caring for a dying woman. My hands were shaking, not with fear, with rage. I picked up the phone. First, Prairie State Bank. I spoke to the branch manager, my voice crisp, official. This is Rowan Blake. I'm an analyst with Northline Atlas, and I'm auditing a trust account linked to our corporate shares. I gave him the trust's number. I need a full audit trail and access log for the safe deposit box associated with this account for the last 6 months. He hesitated. That requires proper authorization. I am aware. You'll find my name on the original charter as a trustee. You will also find a highly irregular power of attorney filed 3 months ago. Failure to provide these logs to a trustee will trigger an immediate formal investigation that will freeze the account and flag your branch. I need the logs in 1 hour. He complied. The logs arrived via secure email. There it was, an after-hours access, a manual override entry, the date, the day after Evelyn was admitted to the hospital, just as Sam had said. The person listed on the log, Marla Dane, authorized agent. Next, the church. I called the parish office, my tone shifting to one of quiet grief. I'm Rowan Blake, Evelyn's granddaughter. I was so flustered at the funeral. I think I left a very important notebook in the vesting room. I know you have a small security camera in that hallway. I was wondering if I could just review the footage from Friday to see if I can spot when I lost it. The parish secretary was kind. Oh, dear. Of course, we only keep the footage for 30 days. But Friday is no problem at all. We can have it ready for you tomorrow. 30 days. The clock was ticking. I looked back at the funeral program Marla had streamlined. I'd found it discarded on a pew. There, on the back, was a handwritten seating chart, and at the bottom, a list under the heading, Do Not Speak. My name was first, my cousin B's was second. This wasn't just about money, this was about erasure. Finally, I logged into my Northline Atlas corporate portal. As a risk analyst, I had access to board agendas. The quarterly meeting was next week. I scanned the items, normal business, budgets, logistics, quarterly earnings, and then I saw it, tucked near the end. Item 7. Proposal for charitable trust restructuring and ESG alignment. My blood ran cold. This was the endgame. It was a complex proposal, filled with corporate jargon, but my brain decoded it in seconds. It proposed that Northline Atlas reacquire its shares from associated charitable trusts in exchange for a generous annual donation. It was a buyout. Marla couldn't just take the Northline shares from the trust. They were too visible, but she could, as the new agent controlling the trust, agree to sell them back to the company. She would gut the fortress from the inside, trading a permanent, powerful voting block for a temporary river of cash she could divert into her new bridge accounts. She would destroy Evelyn's legacy, erase her voice from the company, and walk away with millions. And my father, as the trust's administrator, would be the one signing off on the sale. I leaned back. The pieces were all on the table. The system was clear. I started a new document, a checklist, my path forward. 1. The video from the church, evidence of assault and intent. 2. The bank logs, the timeline of the theft. 3. The hospital records, the proof of incapacity. 4. The law firm, the compromised witnesses at Kepler and Firth. 5. The trust accountant, the original one, before Abernathy retired. He would know where the old bodies were buried. 6. The Northline board, the corporate mechanism of the heist. I picked up my phone. I had one more call to make. A name from my old life, a friend from Chicago who understood how to break things. I sent a text to Naira Holt. Naira, I have a problem. I need signature and witness verification on a POA, and I need it yesterday. A reply came back 30 seconds later. On it. Send me what you have. Who are we burning? My father's wife. Good. The next morning, I began dismantling their machine, piece by piece. There is a process to risk analysis, a methodology. You do not strike at the center. You test the peripherals. You find the loose screws, the hairline fractures, the non-compliant parts. You gather them, one by one, until the weight of your evidence is overwhelming. First, the church. I drafted a formal letter on my Northline Atlas letterhead. It was a slight abuse of my position, but it added a layer of corporate seriousness. I didn't mention a lost notebook. I wrote, pursuant to an internal review concerning a corporate asset, we formally request a copy of all security footage from the chancel-adjacent vesting room and corresponding hallway, covering the hours of 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. on Friday, October 25th. I cited the date of the funeral. I hand-delivered it to the parish administrator, who, seeing the official logo, suddenly became much more efficient. I had the digital file within an hour. I didn't watch it yet. I saved it to a new, encrypted folder on my laptop. Second, the signature. I forwarded the blurry image from Bay, along with the new POA filing, to Naira. Her response was immediate. This is sloppy. I'm hiring a forensic document examiner, a guy named Patel. He's the best, but he needs clean samples, a lot of them. That night, I let myself into Evelyn's house. Marla and my father were staying at her suburban new build, the one my grandmother had always called the beige box. The original house, Evelyn's house, was dark and cold. It smelled like her. a faint scent of chamomile tea and old books. I felt a pang of grief, sharp and suffocating, but I pushed it down. This was not a visit. It was an extraction. I went to her study. I knew where she kept everything. From her desk, I took 3 canceled checks from 5 years ago. I found a stack of birthday cards she had written to me, the handwriting firm and flowing. I found her old gardening journal. I documented every item I took with my phone's camera, then packaged them carefully. I sent them via overnight courier to Naira's office in Chicago with the note, "Control samples." While I was there, I went to the large portrait in the living room. I felt the fresh scratches on the back. It was empty. Whatever Marla had been looking for, she had already taken. Third, the metadata. Naira worked her magic on the photo B had sent. Got it. Her text read, "Image metadata shows it was taken at 8:14 p.m. Tuesday, July 16th. Geotag places it precisely at St. Jude's Hospital, 3rd floor, palliative care wing." I cross-referenced the date. It was the night before the POA was officially signed. Marla had been there, in the room, with the documents, after visiting hours. This led to my next step, the hospital. I called the nursing supervisor for the 3rd floor. I used a different tactic. Not the grieving granddaughter, not the corporate analyst, but the confused relative. "I'm just trying to finalize my grandmother's records," I said, my voice pitched with mild frustration. "My father, Richard, mentioned his wife Marla was handling all the visitor logs. I just need to confirm who was on the approved list that last week. Can you check the call log for the night of July 16th? The supervisor sighed, a sound of someone overworked. "Ma'am, I can't give out visitor names, but I can check the internal nursing notes." A long pause, the clacking of keys. "Ah, here, a note logged at 8:30 p.m. Per call from Mr. Richard Blake's wife, patient is to have no visitors, family only, all other guests to be turned away." Was that not correct? "No," I said, my voice cold. That was not correct. I had been in Chicago, planning to fly down that weekend. She had locked me out. She had isolated her target. I went back to the hospital records. I searched for the cognitive capacity assessment, the one required by the trust charter. It wasn't there. There was a standard admission assessment, but nothing from July 17th, the day of the signing. I called the records department again and asked specifically for it. The clerk was confused. "I see the POA document in her file, ma'am, but there's no corresponding capacity evaluation attached. The attending physician didn't order one." Of course he didn't. Marla wouldn't have asked for an assessment she knew Evelyn would fail. She had relied on the notary's simple procedural stamp, not a medical evaluation. Fifth, the bank. I had the access logs, but I needed the visual. I went to the Prairie State main branch, armed with the original trust charter that named me as a future trustee. I presented it to the same branch manager, Mr. Henderson. "I need the full audit trail for safe deposit box 722, I said. "Not just the log, the audit trail. That includes all security camera stills and, pursuant to your bank's own compliance policy, the fingerprint scans for each after-hours entry." He was sweating. He knew I was not asking for something routine. "This is highly unusual." "This is a formal audit. Mr. Henderson, the next step is a subpoena, which will be much less pleasant for you and for the bank's regulators. I am giving you the chance to be compliant before it becomes a legal matter." It took him 45 minutes. He returned with a thumb drive, his hands shaking. "The stills are time-stamped," he said stiffly. I plugged it in right there at his desk. The timestamp matched the log. The day after Evelyn's admission. The image was grainy, black and white, but unmistakable, Marla, signing the logbook, and a second person with her, using a key, a person I didn't recognize. But the fingerprint scan associated with the manual override entry was clear. It belonged to the bank's own wealth manager, the one who handled the trust account. He hadn't just given her access. He had personally escorted her into the vault. Next, the witnesses. The POA was filed. It was a public record. I pulled the full scanned copy. The signatures of the two independent witnesses were there. One was Alan Firth, Marla's lawyer. A clear conflict of interest, but perhaps not illegal. The second was a woman named Jessica Neal. A quick search of Kepler and Firth's website. Jessica Neal was listed as the firm's head paralegal and notary public. She was not an independent witness. She was an employee. The entire document was invalid. The case was building, but I was missing the why. Marla was liquidating. But where was the money going? Naira found the first thread. "I was looking for debt," she texted. "Found something better, a life insurance policy, not the big one, a secondary policy. One Evelyn probably forgot she even had. Worth about $200,000. The beneficiary was changed 4 months ago. From the trust to Richard Blake." That didn't make sense. My father didn't care about money. "Wait," Naira texted. A minute later, "There's a secondary designation, a transfer on receipt rider. The moment the funds hit Richard's account, they are automatically transferred, in their entirety, to a charitable foundation." My fingers flew across the keyboard. I searched the state's database of nonprofits. There it was, registered 2 months ago. The Marla Cares Foundation. Its mission? Supporting community event planning and beautification. It was a shell, a washing machine. She was moving money from Evelyn, through my father's name, and into her own pocket, all under the guise of charity. Naira found the next piece. "This is dirty. Rowan." I pulled the invoices from the private nursing service Marla hired for Evelyn's last 2 weeks. The first week, the rate was standard. The final week, the rate tripled. Invoices for specialized holistic care. Aromatherapeutic consultations. 24-hour vibrational alignment. Total bill, $90,000. Paid directly from Evelyn's personal checking. Authorized by Marla as POA. It's draining. A perfectly legal way to suck an estate dry before the person even dies. I needed the inside man. The one who knew the books before Marla. Beckett Calloway. He had been Evelyn's trust accountant for 20 years. A man as precise and quiet as a grandfather clock. He had been pushed out at the same time as Arthur Abernathy. I found him at his home. He looked 10 years older, diminished. "Mr. Calloway, it's Rowan Blake. I need to know why you left the trust." He wouldn't look me in the eye. He just kept wiping his hands on a dish towel. "It was time to retire, Miss Blake. Things were changing." "Marla changed them," I said. "She's liquidating. She set up a shell corporation, the Marla Cares Foundation." His head snapped up. His eyes were wide with a mixture of fear and vindication. "I knew it. I knew it. She came in, with that power of attorney. She asked for the ledgers, the private ones, the ones detailing the Northline share value. I told her those were trustee access only. She said she was the trustee now." "What did you do?" I told her I would have to report the request to Mr. Abernathy. The next day, your father, Richard, he came to me. He said they were restructuring, that my services were no longer needed. They pushed me out. Miss Blake threw away 20 years. Did she ask for anything else? "Yes," he whispered. "She asked about the trust's stationery, the official letterhead. She wanted the printer's information." That was the last screw. I went to the local print shop, the one that did all the high-end letterpress for the old families. The owner, a man named Henderson, remembered the order. "Oh yeah, the new Mrs. Blake. She came in a couple months back. Strange order. She wanted a whole new set of Blake Harbor Trust letterhead. A huge run, 5,000 sheets." "What was strange about it?" "Well," he said, pulling the invoice, "she had me change the address. Not the main post office box. She added a new suite number, one over on the highway, and she wanted a new tagline printed at the bottom. A new generation of giving. I told her Mrs. Evelyn's original design didn't have that, but she insisted. Paid in cash, too. She wasn't just planning a fundraiser. She was planning to impersonate the trust. She was building a parallel entity, a phantom, ready to receive the flood of cash from the Northline share sale. I went back to my hotel room. The sterile box was now a war room. I opened my laptop and created a new, secure cloud drive. I uploaded the church video, the bank stills, the fingerprint scans. I uploaded the metadata report, the hospital records, the audio file of Marla's threat, the faked POA, the paralegal's employment records. I added the insurance policy, the invoices for vibrational alignment, the print shop invoice, and the incorporation papers for the Marla Cares Foundation. I created a master timeline, linking every file to a specific date, a specific action. I named the drive. Oregon. Not this time. I wasn't a lawyer, but I had seen enough Northline Atlas contracts to know what came next. I opened a new document. I typed, "Formal Notice of Litigation Hold and Preservation of Evidence." I addressed it to Richard Blake, to Marla Dane, to Kepler and Firth, to Prairie State Bank, and to the Board of Directors of Northline Atlas Logistics. It demanded they preserve every email, every text message, every note, every hard drive, every shred of paper related to Evelyn Blake, the trust, or Marla Cares. It was a weapon, cocked and loaded. All it needed was a lawyer's signature, and I knew exactly who was going to sign it. The summons came via text from my father. 2 hours after I left the print shop. "We're having a family dinner tonight, 7 p.m., at Marla's. Please be here." It wasn't a request. It was a command performance. Marla, having successfully produced the funeral, was now moving to the second act, controlling the narrative. She needed to reestablish the script, to paint me as the unstable, grieving granddaughter, and to solidify her new role as the benevolent matriarch. She was bringing the family together to ensure everyone was reading from her page. Her house was in a new money development outside of town, a sprawling beige stucco box with no trees and too many columns. It was a house built to impress, not to live in. It smelled of new paint and expensive, generic floral arrangements. I was the last to arrive. My father, Richard, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him, stood by the sterile, unlit fireplace. Marla was by the dining room entrance, dressed in a cream-colored cashmere lounge set, the picture of exhausted, wealthy grief, and my half-sister, Lena, sat on the edge of a vast white sofa, her knees pressed together. She was 18, a product of Marla's world, and she looked at me with a mixture of suspicion and fear. "Rowan, darling," Marla said, gliding forward to kiss the air near my cheek. "I'm so glad you came. It's been such a terrible, terrible few days. We all need to be together right now." We sat at the enormous, polished mahogany table. The meal was perfect, catered, and cold. Wine was poured. My father tried to talk about the weather. Lena stared at her plate. Marla orchestrated the small talk, her voice a soft, sympathetic hum. I let them play out the first act. I ate my food. I said nothing. When the dessert plates were cleared, Marla placed her hands on the table, a practiced gesture of sincerity. "I know this is hard," she began, her voice catching with just the right amount of emotion. "Evelyn was a force, and she has left an incredible legacy." Her eyes met mine. "A legacy that your father and I are now tasked with protecting. It's a heavy burden." "It must be," I said. The table went quiet. "All that paperwork." My father stiffened. "Rowan!" "All those trips to the bank," I continued, my voice even. "And the hospital. It must have been exhausting. Getting all those documents signed." "Rowan, please," my father said, louder this time, his voice pleading. "This isn't the time." "It's never the time, is it, Dad?" I looked at him, the man who had traded his spine for a quiet life. "That's the entire problem. You keep saying, 'not this time,' while she hands you a pen and tells you where to sign." Marla's mask of grief fractured. A cold, hard anger flashed in her eyes. "I don't know what you're implying." "I'm not implying." I reached into my bag. I took out the small, black digital recorder. I placed it on the table between us. The small thud on the polished wood was as loud as a gunshot. "I'm stating a fact," I said. "The durable power of attorney. the one that gave you complete control, was signed on July 17th. The law, and the trust charter itself, requires two independent witnesses. Your witnesses were Alan Firth, your personal lawyer, and Jessica Neal, his paid paralegal and notary. That is a conflict of interest. That is not independent. That document is legally worthless. Marla stared at the recorder. For a second, I saw pure, unadulterated panic. Then, it was gone, replaced by a sneer. She laughed, a short, sharp, ugly sound. "You think you're so clever," she said. "You come back here with your little analyst brain and your accusations. You wouldn't dare drag this family's name, your father's name, through the papers. The scandal would ruin him." "You're right," I said. "The papers are messy. They get things wrong. I'm not going to the press." I leaned forward. "I'm going to probate court. It's much more precise. They'll appoint a forensic accountant. They'll subpoena your bank records, your new foundation, everything. They'll put Alan Firth under oath. They'll put you under oath." "You're lying. You're trying to scare us." Lena, who had been silent, suddenly burst out. Her voice was shrill, a perfect echo of her mother's. "Mom just did what she had to do. She was confused. Mom protected the money. She even told me not to sign in front of the nurse, so it would be private and not bother anyone." Her voice trailed off. The silence in the room was absolute. My father froze, his wineglass halfway to his lips. Marla's eyes snapped to Lena, wide with fury. Lena's hand flew to her mouth. She hadn't just seen the POA. She had been there. She had been the third witness. "Sign what, Lena?" I asked, my voice dangerously soft. "What did Marla tell you to sign?" My father slammed his glass down, wine sloshing over the rim. He started to cough, a dry, hacking sound. "That's enough. All of you. This is disgraceful. We are a family. We are here to honor Evelyn. We must protect the family image. This bickering, it's unseemly." "The family image," I repeated. I took my phone from my pocket. "You want to talk about image, Dad? Let's talk about the one from the church." I didn't turn up the sound. I didn't need to. I turned the screen toward them and pressed play. The grainy, black and white video filled the screen, the vesting room hallway, my figure, walking toward the door, Marla, appearing from the side, her face, contorted, her hand, grabbing my jacket, the violent yank, pulling me off balance and into the room, the door shutting. "You little bitch!" Marla shrieked. She lunged, not at me, but at the phone. Her fingers clawed. She was faster than I expected. A blur of cashmere and rage, her chair crashing backward onto the floor. This time, my father moved. He grabbed her wrist in midair, his grip surprisingly strong. "Marla, no, stop it," he hissed, his voice raw with panic. "She's recording everything, don't you see? Stop giving her more." He wasn't protecting me. He was protecting the case. He was afraid of creating more evidence. Marla struggled against his grip, her face a mask of pure hatred. Lena was sobbing. "Mom, stop. Please stop." Slowly, I stood up. I put my phone back in my pocket. The scene was frozen. My father holding his struggling wife, my sister crying, the expensive dinner ruined. I took the thick white envelope from my bag, the one I had prepared at the hotel. I placed it on the table, on top of the recorder. "This is a formal litigation hold," I said, my voice cutting through the chaos. "It's a notice to preserve all records, every email, every text message, every hard drive, every note. It's addressed to you, Dad, and to you, Marla, and to Kepler and Firth. If you delete anything, it's a federal crime. It's called spoliation of evidence. Look it up." I turned and walked away from the table. "You can't afford this," Marla spat from behind me, her voice ragged. She had stopped fighting my father's grip. "You think your little analyst's salary can stand up to our lawyers? We will bury you in motions. We will drain you dry. You'll be broke and disbarred before you ever see a courtroom. You have nothing. I paused at the grand, columned entrance to the dining room. My hand was on the doorframe. A new voice, calm and full of steel, came from the foyer just behind me. "She doesn't have the money," the voice said, "but I do." We all turned. Standing in the entryway, her arms crossed, was Ruth Caro, Evelyn's oldest and closest friend. She was a woman of immense, quiet power, a major philanthropist, and the single largest independent donor to the Blake Harbor Trust. She was dressed in a simple, perfectly tailored black suit, her white hair coiled in a neat bun. She surveyed the scene, the overturned chair, the spilled wine, Marla's disheveled rage, my father's pathetic fear, with an expression of profound and utter contempt. She walked past me, her sensible heels clicking on the marble floor. She stopped at the edge of the table. She looked at my father. "Richard," she said, her voice dripping with disappointment, "Evelyn always said you were weak. I always defended you. I see I was wrong." Then, she turned her gaze on Marla. "And you," she said, "are nothing but a common thief." Ruth turned back to me, and her entire expression softened. She knew. Rowan, Evelyn was no fool. She knew what was coming. She called me, the week before she went into St. Jude's. Ruth reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a single, heavy, cream-colored business card. She held it out to me. She told me, "Ruth, they're going to try to erase my girl. They're going to try to steal my legacy. If they turn on her, if they hurt her, you call this number. You give them hell for me." I took the card. The embossed letters read, "Amira Voss, Esquire, Specialist in Probate and Fiduciary Litigation." "Evelyn's hell is about to begin," Ruth said, her eyes fixed on Marla. "Enjoy your dinner." She put a hand on my back and gently steered me out of the foyer, leaving them frozen in the wreckage of their perfect, hollow room. Meeting Amira Voss was like stepping into a high-pressure clean room. Her office was glass and white oak, overlooking the river, and it was utterly silent. She wasn't warm. She was precise. She didn't offer condolences. She offered a strategy. I handed her the drive. "I named it organ," I said, "for the music, and not this time, for what my father said." Amira plugged it into her system, her eyes scanning the timeline I had built. She read for 10 minutes, her expression unreadable. Finally, she looked up. "Good. You've given me the skeleton. Now we put the muscle on it." She turned to her monitor. "This all happens in probate court," she explained, her voice crisp, didactic. "It's the court that handles wills, estates, and trusts. It's also the court that deals with the exploitation of the elderly. Our first move is defensive." Within an hour, she had filed a petition for an immediate injunction. This was a legal stop sign. It sought to freeze all of Evelyn's assets, halt the sale of the lakefront property, and, most importantly, suspend Marla's power of attorney, pending a full review. Attached to it was the litigation hold I had drafted, now stamped with the authority of her firm. The trap was set. "Now the offense," Amira said, ticking points off on her fingers. "We have two primary arguments: undue influence and lack of capacity. We need to prove Evelyn was not in her right mind when she signed, and that Marla was the one forcing her hand. Your evidence is the foundation. Now we use the power of the court to get the rest." Our first motion was for a retrospective capacity assessment. Amira hired a forensic geriatric psychiatrist. His job was to take my hospital records, the tripled sedative dose, the nurse's log, and write a court-admissible report stating that on July 17th, Evelyn Blake could not have possibly understood the complex legal document she was signing. She lacked the capacity to sign. Next, the bank. My polite but firm request was replaced by a full-fledged subpoena ducis tecum. A Latin phrase I learned meant, "Bring the stuff with you." It was delivered by a marshal to Mr. Baptiste Henderson at Prairie State. It didn't ask for stills. It demanded the complete, unedited, high-definition video files from all cameras pointed at the vault. It demanded the full access logs, the fingerprint scans, and the complete personnel file and internal communications of the wealth manager who had escorted Marla into the vault. Then, Kepler and Firth. They'll claim attorney-client privilege, Amira warned. But we have an exception. It's called the crime fraud exception. You can't hide behind privilege if you were helping commit the fraud. She filed a motion for a limited search of their offices, specifically to retrieve the original, wet ink copy of the power of attorney. Our argument was that the witnesses, their own lawyer and paralegal, were not independent, making the document fraudulent on its face. The judge, seeing the evidence of the conflicted witnesses, agreed. He signed the order. The evidence, once a trickle, became a flood. Naira's expert, Mr. Patel, received the original document. His report was clinical, beautiful, and utterly devastating. He compared the POA signature to the stack of birthday cards and canceled checks I had taken from Evelyn's desk. His conclusion? The signature on the July 17th document is not the natural, fluid writing of Evelyn Blake. It is a slow, labored imitation. The pen lifts, the baseline wavers, and the pressure is inconsistent in a way that suggests a guided hand, or an attempt to trace. It is a simulation of her signature, not the product of it. A guided hand. I pictured Marla, her hand over my grandmother's, forcing the pen across the page. Then, we got a break. A young nurse from St. Jude's, her voice trembling, contacted Amira's office. She wanted whistleblower protection. Amira took her affidavit immediately. It was the night shift manager, the nurse stated. She was friends with Mrs. Dane. She told me to go back into the system and amend Mrs. Blake's chart from 2 hours earlier. I had written patient drowsy, disoriented. The manager told me to change it to patient alert, resting comfortably. She said Mrs. Dane was very stressed and we needed to make sure the chart reflected the family's wishes. She implied my performance review depended on it. While Amira built the case for fraud, I focused on the money. I couldn't shake the Marla Cares Foundation or the Northline Atlas proposal. I handed my files to Sal, Amira's forensic accountant. He was a quiet man who looked like he could find a single missing dollar in a hurricane. He found it all. It's a classic circle, he told me, showing me a flowchart that looked like a plate of spaghetti. Step 1. The Blake Harbor Trust, under Marla's control, donates $200,000 to the Marla Cares Foundation for a community beautification gala. Step 2. The Marla Cares Foundation immediately pays $180,000 of that donation to a vendor for event planning services. Step 3. The vendor, Dane Events LLC, is a limited liability company registered 3 months ago. Its sole owner is Marla's best friend. She wasn't just stealing, she was laundering the trust's money through her own fake charity and into her friend's pocket, taking 90 cents on every dollar. I took that information and applied it to my own turf. Northline Atlas. I sat in my hotel room, my analyst brain finally having all the variables. The ESG restructuring proposal was the big heist. The fake charity was just practice. I read the proposal again, but this time, I ignored the green language. I went straight to the penalty clauses, the part of a contract everyone skips. It was a risk analyst's bread and butter. The contract stated that if Northlane failed to meet its carbon-neutral shipping targets that were deliberately vague and impossible to measure, it would pay a substantial non-compliance penalty. But the penalty wasn't paid back to the trust, which was selling its shares. It was paid to a third-party compliance auditor. My fingers flew. A corporate search. The auditor. Midwest Green Compliance had been incorporated 6 weeks ago. Its registered agent? Alan Firth, of Kepler and Firth. It was a brilliant VO machine. Marla would sell Evelyn's shares to Northline, get a huge pile of cash. Then, the company would fail its ESG goals, and her lawyer would get another pile of cash, siphoned directly from the corporate treasury. She was hitting the family, the trust, and the company, all at once. Amira folded all of it into her primary filing. It was thick as a novel. Here is the case, she told me and Ruth Caro, who was funding the entire war. We are filing on 2 counts. First, undue influence against Marla Dane. We have the isolation, the control of medication, the fraudulent witnesses, and the financial benefit. She coerced Evelyn. Second, she paused, looking at me. We are filing for breach of fiduciary duty against your father, Richard Blake. My stomach dropped. He didn't do anything. That's the point, Amira said, her voice firm but not unkind. He was the administrator of that trust. He had a legal duty to protect it, to act in its best interest. He knew Marla. He saw the changes. He let her isolate his mother. He signed the documents for the bridge accounts. His silence, his passivity, his desire for a quiet life. That is not a legal defense. That is complicity. He was a passive accomplice to the theft, and the law holds him accountable. Marla, of course, did not take this lying down. The day after our filing, the war went public. She hired a rabid, expensive Chicago PR firm. Suddenly, the local news website was full of anonymous comments. I heard the granddaughter was cut out of the will years ago for drug use. Rowan Blake hasn't visited her grandmother in years. Now she shows up for the money. Marla Dane was a saint. She cared for that woman. A dozen blogs I'd never heard of popped up, all painting Marla as the grieving widow and me as the heartless, greedy vulture. I wanted to scream. I wanted to post the video of the slap. I wanted to show them the forged signature. You will do nothing, Amira commanded. You will not speak. You will not post. You will not defend yourself. They are throwing mud in a hurricane. We will stand still and let them. Our response will be filed in court, not in a comment section. The noise was deafening, but Ruth Caro, who had seen it all, knew how to cut through it. She didn't issue a press release. She didn't grant an interview. She simply gave the local paper one item. It ran on the front of the lifestyle section. It was a high-resolution scan of a letter, handwritten on Evelyn's personal stationery, dated 1 year prior, long before the hospital, long before the drugs. It was a letter from Evelyn to Ruth. It was about gardening, about the new library books, and about her family. The final paragraph was circled in red. Richard is a good man, it read, in Evelyn's strong, familiar cursive. But he is not a strong one. Marla sees only a prize. She is all sharp edges and appetite. It is Rowan who understands the heart of it. She has my steel. She is the true keeper of our family's values. When the time comes, I trust her to protect what we built. The social media storm went quiet. That letter, combined with Sal's flowcharts showing the money already draining from the accounts, was all Amira needed. She filed an emergency motion for an expedited hearing, arguing that Marla was actively dissipating the estate. The judge read the motion, read Sal's report, and read Evelyn's letter. He granted it. The hearing was set, not in 6 months, in 2 weeks. Marla's PR firm had no answer. The gavel had spoken. The probate court was Amira's battlefield. Northline Atlas was mine. While she was filing subpoenas and drowning Marla's PR firm in legal fact, I was in Chicago, sitting at my own desk, running internal diagnostics. A scheme this complex, one that culminated in a full-scale assault on my company's treasury, required more than just my father's passive compliance. Marla couldn't have drafted that ESG restructuring proposal herself. It was too sophisticated. It needed an architect, an inside man. I started where Sal, the forensic accountant, had left off, the shell company. Dane Events, LLC, the one owned by Marla's friend, the one that received 90 cents on every dollar laundered from the Marla Cares charity. I ran the vendor name against our internal supplier database. No match. That would have been too obvious. But I wasn't just looking at suppliers. I was looking at conflicts of interest. Every officer at Northline, from the C-suite down to the VPs, is required to file an annual disclosure. They must declare any and all financial interests held by themselves or their immediate family. It's a standard SEC compliance check. I ran the incorporation papers for Dane Events LLC against the family-held assets listed in those disclosures. And I got a hit, a bright, flashing red flag on my screen. Mark Scanlon, our chief financial officer, the man who signed off on every major expenditure, the man who built our budgets and managed our investor relations, his wife, listed on his 2024 disclosure, held a minority interest stake, 10%, in a boutique event planning company. The company was Dane Events, LLC. The man in charge of our company's entire financial health had a direct, personal, financial stake in the very company Marla was using as her primary money laundering vehicle. This changed everything. The ESG proposal wasn't Marla's idea that she'd convinced my father to push. It was a pincer move. It had been conceived by our own CFO. I went back, searching my own risk department's archives. My stomach clenched. 1 year ago, long before Evelyn was even in the hospital, I had authored a standard risk report. It had flagged a series of charitable event sponsorships as having insufficient oversight and questionable ROI. The report noted that the contracts were being fast-tracked without proper compliance review, leaving the company exposed to reputational and financial risk. I looked at the distribution list. It had gone to the audit committee, and I looked at the signature that had stopped it from going any further. Richard Blake, my father. In his capacity as a non-executive vice president and, crucially, the chair of the Charitable Giving Committee, he had tabled my report. His official note read, "Tabled for further review, pending a more holistic assessment of our community engagement." He hadn't just been passive. He hadn't just looked away. A full year ago, he had actively buried my warning. He had cleared the path. He had held the door open for them. I couldn't just drop this in a company-wide email. Scanlon would shred me. The general counsel would bury the claim to protect the company from a lawsuit. I needed an ally on the board, someone insulated from the internal politics, someone who feared a lawsuit more than he feared a drop in the stock price. Jasper Klein. Jasper was the longest-serving independent director on our board. He was old money, old school, and a contemporary of Evelyn's. He had been on the board for 30 years. He was the definition of risk-averse, a man whose entire reputation was built on stability and unimpeachable corporate governance. I requested 15 minutes with him. His assistant gave me 10. I didn't fly home. I was already in Chicago. I walked into his cavernous office at the Aon Center. He didn't stand. "Rowan," he said, his voice a dry rustle. "I was deeply sorry to hear about Evelyn, a fine woman, a founder. Now, what is this? I trust it's not about the unpleasantness I've been reading about in the local papers. The board does not involve itself in personal disputes." "It stopped being a personal dispute, Mr. Klein," I said. "The moment it started involving our CFO and a fraudulent ESG proposal." His eyes sharpened. I didn't show him the video of the slap. I didn't show him the forged will or the hospital records. He didn't care about Marla's cruelty. He cared about liability. I laid 3 documents on his polished desk. First, Sal's flowchart, the Blake Harbor Trust, the arrow to Marla Cares, the arrow to Dane Events, LLC. Second, the printout from Scanlon's disclosure, spouse interest, 10%, Dane Events, LLC. "Our CFO," I said, "is in business with the woman currently being sued for defrauding the Blake Harbor Trust." Jasper's face went pale. He was already seeing a shareholder lawsuit. "Third," I said, placing the ESG proposal on top. "This is the proposal to reacquire the trust's shares. It was drafted by Scanlon's office. And this clause here," I pointed, "directs all non-compliance penalties to a third-party auditor." I ran a check on that auditor. Midwest Green Compliance. It's a shell corporation registered 6 weeks ago to Alan Firth, Marla Dane's personal lawyer. Jasper looked at the papers. He looked at me. He was no longer seeing a grieving granddaughter. He was seeing a federal indictment. He was seeing his own name in a deposition, being asked, "What did you know, Mr. Klein, and when did you know it?" This is a staggering allegation, Rowan." "It is a catastrophic compliance failure," I corrected him. "The CFO has an undeclared active conflict of interest with a party now engaged in litigation against a major shareholder, the trust. He is simultaneously proposing a financial transaction with that same trust, a transaction that financially benefits his co-conspirators. We, the board, now know about it. Our liability clock started 3 minutes ago. He understood that language. He picked up his desk phone. "Helen," he said to his assistant, his voice like flint. "Clear my afternoon. Get every member of the audit committee and the general counsel on a conference call. I don't care where they are. Get them, now, and send Ms. Blake to the main conference room. She'll need the good projector." News of an emergency, off-cycle audit committee meeting, called by Jasper Klein, sent a shockwave through the executive floor. The general counsel's office, which had likely dismissed Amira's litigation hold as a minor family matter, suddenly snapped to attention. Within an hour, a company-wide, all-caps email went out from the legal department. Document preservation order. It mandated that no employee delete any communication, digital or physical, related to the Blake Harbor Trust, the Marla Cares Foundation, Dane Events, LLC, or Midwest Green Compliance. The atmosphere shifted from gossip to pure cold panic. People started trying to save themselves. In the next 2 hours, I received 3 anonymous, encrypted emails. They were forwarded to my personal account, bypassing the company servers. They were from 3 different mid-level managers, 1 in finance, 2 in marketing. They were all forwarding the same email chain. It was from my father, from 6 months ago. He was strongly encouraging them to approve the sponsorship contracts for the Marla Cares Gala, the first seed money for the fraud. One of the managers, a brave one, had replied, "Richard, compliance flagged this vendor. They failed the new supplier check. We can't proceed." My father's reply, the one he had typed with his own hands, was damning. "This is a passion project for my wife and is critical to our community image. I understand the compliance flag, but I am assuming the risk personally. Make it happen." He had put it in writing. The PR department tried to intervene. The head of PR, a slick woman named Sharon, cornered Jasper outside the boardroom. "Jasper, we need to get ahead of this," I heard her say, her voice urgent. "We can frame this, a story of corporate philanthropy, honoring Evelyn's legacy. We can say the company is supporting the family in its time of grief." Jasper didn't even slow down. He brushed past her. "Sharon," he snapped, "this is not a storytelling problem. This is a compliance problem. Save your narrative for the SEC." The emergency session was held in the main boardroom. The 50-foot mahogany table was mostly empty, but the video wall was lit up with the faces of directors from New York, London, and Hong Kong. Jasper Klein sat at the head. The general counsel sat beside him, looking grim. And at the far end of the table, looking small and gray, was my father. Next to him, his face a furious shade of red, was CFO Mark Scanlon. They had been summoned. "Ms. Blake," Jasper said, his voice booming in the quiet room, "you have the floor. This board is convening to address serious allegations of internal control failures and breaches of fiduciary duty." I stood at the lectern. This was my room. This was my language. I was not the grieving girl by the casket. I was the analyst. "Good afternoon," I said, my voice steady, amplified by the microphone. "My job is to identify risk. For the past year, our company has been exposed to a cascading failure. It began as a family matter, but it has metastasized into a direct threat to this company's integrity and its shareholders. I am here to show you the architecture of that failure." I didn't show them the audio file of Marla's threat. I didn't show them the picture of my bloody lip. I showed them data. My first slide was the flowchart, the web of arrows and boxes. The Blake Harbor Trust, the Marla Cares Foundation, Dane Events, LLC, Midwest Green Compliance, 4 entities, 1 purpose, to siphon funds from a trust, and ultimately, from Northline Atlas itself. My second slide, a list of names. Marla Dane, the primary beneficiary, Alan Firth, the legal agent, and Mark Scanlon, our chief financial officer, whose wife is a 10% owner of the primary laundering vehicle. Scanlon shot to his feet. "This is an outrage. It's slander. My wife's business is her own. This is a personal vendetta from a disgruntled employee." "Is it a personal vendetta, Mark?" I asked, my voice flat. "That you personally drafted the ESG restructuring proposal? The one that directs millions in potential penalties to a shell company run by the same lawyer who controls the foundation your wife profits from? Is that just a coincidence?" He sat down. He said nothing. The directors on the video wall just stared. My third slide, the email chain, my father's words, projected 10 feet high for the entire room to see. "I will assume the risk." "My father, Richard Blake," I said, not looking at him, "used his position as non-executive vice president to override internal compliance checks. He forced the approval of contracts that directly, and illegally, benefited his wife's fraudulent charity. This is the definition of a conflict of interest. He exposed this company to massive liability. He did it in writing." I let the silence hang. The directors looked at the screen, then at my father, then at Scanlon. Sloan Ritter, the youngest board member, a tech investor from Silicon Valley, unmuted her mic. Her voice was sharp, cutting through the silence. "This is messy. Rowan, I'm a simple person. Let's cut through the noise. Just tell us, who gets rich if this ESG proposal goes through and the trust is dissolved as planned?" I clicked to my final slide. It was a picture of Marla, taken from a society blog, smiling at a gala, champagne flute in hand. Next to her was the logo for Dane Events, LLC. "She does," I said, "and our CFO, and their lawyer. They intended to liquidate Evelyn Blake's legacy, and they are using Northline Atlas as the getaway car." The vote was immediate. Jasper Klein made the motion. "I move," he announced, "for an immediate, independent, outside investigation to be conducted by a third-party law firm. I further move that Mr. Scanlon be placed on immediate administrative leave and that Mr. Blake be suspended from all committee duties and board access, pending the result of that investigation." It was seconded. It passed unanimously. The video wall went dark. The general counsel was already on the phone with an outside firm. Scanlon had stormed out, his own phone pressed to his ear. I packed my laptop. I was the last one in the room, besides my father. He stood by the wall of windows, his back to me, looking down at the city lights. "Evelyn loved this company," he said, his voice hollow. "She built it, with her own hands." "Yes, she did." He turned. I saw the profound, uncomprehending despair of a weak man caught in a machine he never bothered to understand. His eyes were wet. "You've destroyed me, Rowan," he whispered. "You've ruined my name, all of it, in front of everyone, your own father." I zipped my laptop bag. I looked at him, not as a father, but as a failed component, a compromised part of the system. "You did this," I said, my voice as cold and clear as the glass in the window. "You buried my report. You signed the papers. You chose her. You chose a quiet life over doing what was right. She just wanted to be respected. She wanted to be rich, and you let her. You held the door." I walked past him toward the door. "I'm not destroying you, Dad," I said, pausing with my hand on the handle. "I'm saving Grandma's company. I'm saving her name." The system Marla had built was designed to withstand a single, frontal assault. She never anticipated an attack from every direction at once. The blowback was immediate, a cascade of dominoes falling in perfect, rapid succession. The first to go was her legal cover, Kepler and Firth, the firm that had rubber-stamped her fraudulent POA and employed the independent witness, received a courtesy copy of Amira's filing. It was also, quite helpfully, carbon copied to their malpractice insurance carrier. The morning after the Northline Atlas board meeting, Alan Firth filed an emergency motion to withdraw as counsel for Marla Dane. The official reason cited, was an irreconcilable conflict of interest. The unofficial reason was abject terror. He was no longer a lawyer. He was a co-conspirator. By abandoning her, he was making his first, desperate attempt to become a witness rather than a defendant. Marla was left legally naked in a hailstorm. The second domino fell at the hospital. The junior nurse, now fully protected as a legal whistleblower, gave a formal deposition. Her testimony, that she was ordered by the night shift manager to falsify Evelyn's medical chart, was explosive. The hospital's board, fearing a colossal lawsuit, moved instantly. They suspended the manager, who, faced with perjury charges and the loss of her license, confessed immediately. She admitted everything. She had been threatened with termination if she didn't comply. And the person who had threatened her, the hospital administrator, a woman I had never met, but who, the nurse testified, was best friends with Marla Dane. Suddenly, the grainy still from the Prairie State Bank vault snapped into focus. Amira subpoenaed the administrator's employee file. We put her ID badge photo next to the still from the vault. It was a perfect match. The woman who had ordered Evelyn's charts to be faked was the same woman who had personally used her credentials to escort Marla into the safe deposit box. The day after Evelyn was admitted, this wasn't just influence, it was a conspiracy. Marla, now desperate and represented by a frantic, court-appointed attorney, tried to fight back in the only arena she understood, media manipulation. She gave a tearful interview to a bottom-feeder gossip blog, painting me as a cold, greedy, and estranged granddaughter who hadn't seen her grandmother in months and was now just here for the money. She claimed I was harassing a grieving widow. Amira's response was surgical. She didn't issue a statement. She didn't attack. She simply released one file to the Chicago Tribune and the local paper. The video from the church vesting room. It was silent, black and white, and ran for only 90 seconds. But it was devastating. It showed me, in my funeral attire, walking toward the room. It showed Marla, the grieving widow, lunging at me. It showed her grabbing the lapels of my coat, her face contorted in a mask of rage. It showed the violent yank as she dragged me, stumbling, out of the camera's frame. The public narrative shattered. The woman claiming to be a victim of harassment was seen, on the day of the funeral, physically assaulting her stepdaughter next to the sanctuary. Evelyn's letter, which Ruth had already published, proved the lie of me being estranged. The video proved the lie of Marla being a victim. The blowback hit the corporate world next. The Northline Atlas Board, terrified of an SEC investigation and shareholder lawsuits, acted decisively. They issued a formal press release announcing they had hired a Big Four accounting firm to conduct a full independent forensic audit into potential compliance failures and irregularities originating from the CFO's office and the charitable committee. Our stock price dipped 3% in pre-market trading. It was a clear, cold signal to Wall Street. The company was cutting out the infection. Mark Scanlon was fired, not just suspended, and the audit, I knew, would give the board the ironclad justification they needed to claw back every dollar he'd ever received in bonuses. My father, now suspended and a pariah, was waiting for me outside my hotel. He looked like he hadn't slept in a week. He looked gray, haunted. "Rowan," he pleaded, his voice a dry whisper. "Please, you've won. The trust is frozen. The company is safe. You've done it. You can stop." "Stop what, Dad?" "This, the lawyers, the papers. It's too much. Marla, she's not well. She's broken. All I ever wanted," his voice cracked. "All I ever wanted was a quiet life." I looked at him, this man who had traded my grandmother's entire legacy for the absence of conflict. "A quiet life," I said. "You don't get one. You made your choice. You chose her lies over Grandma's truth. You signed the papers." I reached into my bag and pulled out a single sheet of paper. It wasn't from Amira. It was a timeline I had built myself, cross-referencing state and federal statutes. "This isn't my case against you," I said, handing it to him. "This is the state's." His eyes scanned the page. He saw the words: conspiracy to commit fraud, wire fraud, mail fraud, forgery in the third degree, aiding and abetting elder abuse. That's the criminal liability. Dad, I said, my voice as flat as the concrete we stood on. The district attorney is looking at this. They see your signature on the bridge accounts. They see your email from a year ago. Overriding compliance. The one where you wrote, I will assume the risk personally. They see that as you joining the conspiracy. So you don't get a quiet life. You get to make one last choice. You are either a witness for the prosecution, or you are a co-defendant. That's all that's left. He stared at the paper, his hand shaking. He finally understood. This isn't the time had run out. As the legal and corporate walls closed in, Marla made one last, desperate move. She was a cornered animal, and she was going for cash. The probate judge had successfully frozen the trust in Evelyn's estate. He had even frozen the Marla Cares accounts. But Marla and my father had one major asset in their own names: a vacation cottage on Lake Michigan. If she could liquidate it, she'd have a cash-filled escape hatch. She put it on the market for a cash-only, as-is sale, $90,000 under market value. She needed it sold in 24 hours. She underestimated Naira. Naira, on the first day, had placed a simple digital title watch on every piece of property they owned. The moment a title company in Michigan ran a search on the cottage, an alert pinged Naira's phone. She's running, Rowan, Naira's text read. She's trying to sell the lake house. Closing is scheduled for 4 p.m. today. One call from Amira to the probate judge was all it took. He was furious. This attempt to bypass his injunction was a direct contempt of court. He issued an immediate, emergency stop sale order, faxed directly to the Michigan Title Company and the bank handling the transaction. The sale was blocked with less than 30 minutes to spare. She was trapped. She had no money, no lawyer, and no way out. While Marla was failing to sell her assets, Ruth Caro was funding the final nail. She paid for the digital forensics team that Amira's court order had authorized. They descended on Kepler and Firth servers and Marla's home laptop. They were looking for the deleted files. They found them. The original email chain between Marla, Scanlon, and Alan Firth. The one where they meticulously planned the ESG restructuring proposal. They found the draft where they calculated, down to the dollar, how much the non-compliance penalties would pay out to Firth's shell company. It was a written confession. The local paper, which had been following the saga from the start, finally ran its full investigative piece, the Sunday edition, front page, above the fold. The headline was a masterpiece of cold fury, borrowing the words that had started it all. This isn't the time, when a family's silence concealed a system of abuse. The story laid it all out. A clinical dissection of the entire conspiracy, the hospital, the bank, the law firm, the company. It used my father's quote as the central theme, a portrait of a weak man whose desire for a quiet life had enabled a predator. And then, the final, most beautiful thing happened. The community, the one Marla had tried to swindle with her fake charity, began to move. With the Blake Harbor Trust now firmly under the control of the court-appointed monitor, the money started to come back, not in a trickle, but in a flood. Donations poured in from all over the county. Old families who had known Evelyn for 50 years. Young scholarship recipients who had gone to college on her money. People sent in checks for $20, for $500, for $10,000. The trust, nearly bankrupted, was flooded with new life. It was a rejection of Marla, a rejection of my father's weakness. It was the entire town, standing up in unison, to reclaim Evelyn's name and stand beside me. The public humiliation and the forensic audit had broken the dam. The truth, held back by my father's weakness and Marla's aggression, now flowed freely. It wasn't a sudden flood. It was a slow, toxic leak, revealing the rot that had set in years ago. Naira was the one who found the root cause. She had been digging into Marla's life before she ever met my father. before she was Marla Dane. "She's not just a thief, Rowan," Naira said over the phone, her voice flat. "She's a failed entrepreneur, and she's desperate." She sent me the file. Marla, under her previous married name, had started a high-end event planning business in Arizona. It had failed, spectacularly, leaving a trail of debt. But it was worse than that. She owed over $80,000 in overdue payroll taxes to the IRS, and she had personally guaranteed a business loan for $250,000 that was now in default. The bank in Scottsdale was set to seize her assets a month before she married your father, Naira explained. She was at the end of her rope. She didn't marry him for love, or even for his status. She married him for a bailout. There it was. Not a grand, complex motive, just the grubby, ordinary desperation of someone who had spent money she didn't have and was about to pay the price. Evelyn's trust wasn't a prize. It was a lifeline. She wasn't building an empire. She was plugging a hole. It was this, the sheer banality of her greed, that finally shattered my father's denial. He had agreed to meet me at Amira's office. He wasn't the suspended VP. He was just Richard Blake, a man who had received a target letter from the district attorney's office. He sat across from Amira, his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles were white. "She told me she could help," he said, his voice quiet, directed at the table. I didn't know about the debts, not at first." "Help with what, Richard?" Amira asked, her voice neutral, letting him talk. "Northline," he whispered. "We were in a slump 5, 6 years ago, before Rowan's department really streamlined things. Our logistics were sound, but our image was stale. We were losing bids. Marla, she was so vibrant. She knew everyone. She had this network. She said she could bring in new money, new donors, new clients. She promised to revitalize our brand through her connections." He looked up, his eyes pleading with me. "She just wanted to organize a few events. That's all it was at first. The gala, the fundraisers. It seemed harmless. It seemed like she was helping. When your grandmother questioned it, I thought she was just being critical, old-fashioned." "When did you find the email?" I asked. He flinched. The digital forensics team, in their sweep, had recovered my father's deleted files. Not just Marla's. They had found the message. "A few months after we were married," he admitted. "I was cleaning out Evelyn's old desktop. It was in a drafts folder, an email she had written to me but never sent, probably from the day I announced our engagement." He recited it from memory, his voice hollow. "Richard, be careful. This woman is not what she seems. She is all sharp edges and appetite. She doesn't love you. She loves easy money, and there is no such thing. She will be your ruin." "She warned you," I said. It wasn't an accusation. It was a statement of fact. "I deleted it," he said, his voice breaking. "I was angry. I thought she was trying to poison me against my new wife. I thought I was finally happy. I chose to believe the lie." He looked at Amira. "She's not a monster. She's just terrified. Of going back. Of being poor. When the debt surfaced, she promised she could fix it. She said the trust was being wasted on ungrateful kids. She said Evelyn was out of touch. She said if we just reallocated some of the funds, we could secure our future, secure Northline, secure the family." She made it sound logical, like a business decision. "She made it sound like a crime, Richard," Amira said. "And you helped?" He was pathetic, a man so desperate for a quiet, happy life that he had actively ignored every red flag, every warning, even from his own mother, until he was a co-conspirator in her destruction. The final piece of the puzzle didn't come from my father. It came from my half-sister. Lena appeared at my hotel room door late that night. She looked small and terrified, clutching a gray thumb drive in her hand as if it were a bomb. "I can't," she whispered, her eyes wide with fear. "I can't listen to her anymore." "Listen to who?" I asked, letting her into the room. "Mom, she's not making sense. She's on the phone all day, screaming at lawyers. She keeps telling me I have to lie for her. She says I have to go to court and say Grandma was crazy, that Grandma begged her to take over the money. Lena sat on the edge of the bed, her hands twisting in her lap. I'm so scared of her, Rowan, but… She looked up, her eyes bright with tears. I'm more scared of disappointing Grandma Evelyn. I loved her. She was always nice to me. She didn't deserve this. She held out the drive. I found this. It was taped under Mom's desk drawer. I know it's what she used for it. I took the drive from her. Thank you, Lena. You're doing the right thing. Am I? She sobbed. I'm ruining my family. No, I said, my voice softer than I intended. You're saving it. I plugged the drive into my laptop. It was meticulously organized. Marla was nothing if not a good project manager. The main folder was titled, Step-by-Step Transfer. It was all there, the entire plan, broken down into phases. Phase 1, isolation. Replace lawyer, replace accountant, restrict visitors. Phase 2, acquisition. Secure POA, gain access to vault, locate original will. Phase 3, liquidation. Sell properties, identify corporate assets. Phase 4, transfer. Dane events. Marla Cares, ESG proposal. It was a complete blueprint for the theft. It was the why and the how, authored by Marla herself. But there was one other file on the drive, a single audio file. Our signing convo, MP3. I pressed play. It was Marla and my father. The audio was clear. Marla, Richard, for God's sake, it's just a piece of paper. Just sign it. Richard, muffled. I don't know, Marla. This feels wrong. My mother, she would never… Marla. Her voice turns to steel. Your mother is not here. I am your wife. I am the one trying to save this family while you hide in your office. I've done all the work. All you have to do is what you do best. Sign the paper. Just sign it. I'll do the rest. A long silence. The sound of a pen scratching on a desk. That was it. The sound of his final, complete surrender. I took the drive and the audio file to Amira's office the next morning. My father was already there, waiting in the conference room. He was scheduled to give his formal proffer, his testimony, to the district attorney in exchange for immunity. I walked in. I looked at him. He saw the thumb drive in my hand. He knew what it was. This is it, Dad, I said, my voice void of emotion. This is your last chance. You can walk into that room and tell them the truth, the whole truth. You can tell them about this. I held up the drive. And this, I pointed to the speaker on the conference phone where I had played the audio. You can stand on the right side, or you can stand with her. There is no middle ground left. He looked at the drive. He looked at the floor. He nodded, a single, defeated motion. I'll testify, he said. I'll tell them everything. I'll resign from the board. From everything. I nodded. Good. I turned to Amira. But there's a condition. His immunity is one thing. The trust is another. I want it in writing. The Blake Harbor Trust must revert to Evelyn's original 1995 charter, and I want a new oversight committee, a community board, with Ruth Caro and Mr. Calloway on it, no family, ever again. Done, Amira said. The confession, the USB drive, and the audio file turned the case from a civil dispute into an open and shut criminal matter. Beckett Calloway, the old accountant, was brought back in by the court-appointed monitor. He arrived carrying his original, leather-bound ledger, the one Marla had seized. She took it, he said, but I knew she wouldn't know what to look for. He opened the book. She tore out the pages, he said, his voice shaking with anger. The pages from the last 6 months. The forensic accountant pulled up the step-by-step drive. He opened a spreadsheet file. I don't think she did. Mr. Calloway, I think she just digitized them. He projected the file on the wall. The spreadsheet columns matched the ledger's formatting perfectly. All the missing pages were there. Marla had just been moving her work to the cloud. Naira, meanwhile, had closed the final loop. She took a photo of Marla to the print shop. The owner, Mr. Henderson, identified her instantly. "That's her," he said. "The one who wanted the new letterhead. She was very specific about the paperweight. Very specific." The last dominoes fell. The hospital, based on its own internal investigation, fired the administrator and the night shift manager. They sent their complete file to the district attorney. Marla, abandoned by Firth, finally managed to hire a new, expensive criminal defense attorney. He called Amira for a meeting. He tried to sell a new story, a story of a loving, misunderstood wife, overwhelmed by a complex estate, who had simply made a few procedural errors. Amira listened patiently. When he was done, she pressed play on the audio file. "Just sign it," Marla's voice filled the room. "I'll do the rest." The lawyer's face went gray. He had no story to sell. He had no cards left to play. He had nothing. The campaign was now a three-front war, and the final coordinated strike was ready. The days of quiet investigation were over. This was the offensive, a series of rapid, overwhelming blows designed to leave them no room to maneuver. It happened in three arenas, almost simultaneously: the court of law, the corporate boardroom, and the court of public opinion. The probate hearing was first. The courtroom was packed, a standing-room-only theater of our small town's elite, all there to see the Blakes bleed. Marla was there, her new, expensive defense attorney beside her. She looked smaller, her usual sharp performance flattened by the sterile, fluorescent lighting of the law. She was no longer a producer. She was a defendant. Amira Voss was magnificent. She was not a performer. She was a surgeon. She began with Mr. Patel, the forensic handwriting expert. He spoke for 20 minutes, his testimony a clinical, dispassionate assassination. He projected Evelyn's strong, fluid signature from her letters next to the jagged, fearful line on the power of attorney. "This is not a signature," he stated, his voice calm. "It is a simulation. You can see the hesitation, the inconsistent pressure. The pen lifts where none should be. It is the artifact of a hand being guided, or a mind so clouded it is merely tracing a memory. It is, unequivocally, not the product of Evelyn Blake's natural hand." Next, the geriatric psychiatrist. She had never met my grandmother, but she had lived in her medical file for 2 weeks. "On the morning of July 17th, the doctor said, referencing the chart I had fought for. The patient, Evelyn Blake, had been administered a dose of lorazepam, 3 times the standard therapeutic level for her age and weight. This, combined with her underlying condition, would have rendered her legally incapable of understanding, let alone consenting to, a complex, multi-page legal document. She would not have had the capacity to understand what she was signing. Period. Marla's lawyer tried to cross-examine. He blustered about family stress, about a granddaughter's opinion, but he couldn't argue with the toxicology. He couldn't argue with the ink. Then, Amira called her final witness. "The defense," Amira said, "has attempted to paint this as a misunderstanding, a matter of family helping family. We will now hear from the family." She called Richard Blake to the stand. My father walked to the box. He looked 100 years old. He did not look at Marla. He looked at me. Just once, his eyes hollow. He took the oath. Amira was gentle. "Mr. Blake, you have been granted immunity from criminal prosecution in exchange for your full and truthful testimony. Do you understand?" "I do." His voice was a rasp. "Please tell the court, in your own words, who was responsible for the creation of the July 17th power of attorney." My father closed his eyes. This was it, the final door. "It was Marla," he said, the microphone carrying his whisper to every corner of the silent room. "It was all her idea, from the start." He confessed to everything, the lies, the pressure, the forged bridge account signatures, the way she had promised it would secure their future. He detailed her plan, her desperation over her debts, her dismissal of his mother as an old woman who didn't understand. She was the architect, he said, his voice finally clear, breaking with a terrible finality. She planned it, she executed it, and I was a passive accomplice. I let it happen. I failed in my fiduciary duty. I failed my mother. I failed my daughter. He looked at the judge. I am here to accept full civil responsibility for my part in this. The judge, a no-nonsense woman who had seen everything, didn't wait. She delivered her ruling from the bench. This court finds, based on the overwhelming and uncontroverted expert testimony, that Evelyn Blake lacked the requisite capacity to execute the documents of July 17th. This court further finds, based on the sworn testimony of Mr. Richard Blake, that the creation of these documents was the product of undue influence and a conspiracy to defraud. Therefore, the power of attorney is declared void. The subsequent will, based on that fraudulent authority, is also declared void. This court hereby reinstates the last valid will and testament of Evelyn Blake, dated 2 years prior. The gavel struck. It was a sound like a starting pistol. The will that had left me as steward of the trust was now the law. At that exact moment, 200 miles away in Chicago, Jasper Klein was addressing the Northline Atlas Board of Directors. The emergency session was not to debate, but to act. The independent, third-party auditors had presented their final report. It was a 120-page document that corporate nightmares are made of. Jasper, his voice ringing with cold fury, read the executive summary aloud. The audit committee has concluded that former CFO Mark Scanlon and former VP Richard Blake engaged in a systematic abuse of philanthropy and a gross, willful conflict of interest. They actively bypassed internal controls to direct corporate funds to an entity, Dane Events LLC, in which Mr. Scanlon's spouse held an undisclosed financial stake. This action, combined with their attempt to push the fraudulent ESG proposal, constituted a multi-layered conspiracy to defraud Northline Atlas, its shareholders, and the Blake Harbor Trust. The vote was a formality. They voted unanimously to cancel every contract, past and present, with Dane Events, Midwest Green Compliance, and any other shell they had discovered. They voted to initiate civil litigation against Scanlon to claw back 5 years of his salary and bonuses. And then, the final, brutal move. Jasper made the motion. I move that this full, unredacted report, along with all supporting evidence gathered by our auditors, be turned over to the Office of the State Attorney General for criminal investigation. It passed. The corporation, to save itself, had just officially fed its own executives to the wolves. I walked out of the probate courtroom, Amira at my side. We were hit by a wall of cameras and local reporters, their microphones like a thicket. Rowan, how do you feel? Ms. Blake, what do you have to say to your stepmother? Is this justice for Evelyn? I felt the urge to unload, to tell them everything, to describe the slap, the terror, the betrayal. But Amira had been clear. The facts are our only voice. I held up my hand. The crowd quieted. We have no emotional statements to make, I said, my voice steady. The court's ruling speaks for itself. My grandmother's good name has been restored. Her true wishes are being honored. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a stack of simple, one-page documents. I handed them out. This is a timeline of the evidence we presented. It details the facts. That's all we have to say. A reporter grabbed one, his eyes scanning it. This is the bank records, the hospital logs. This is everything. Yes, I said. It is. As I turned to leave, a small, trembling hand slid into mine. I looked down. It was Lena. She had been sitting in the back of the courtroom, unseen, now. She stepped forward, blinking in the flashbulbs, but her chin was high. A reporter saw her. Lena Dane, what are you doing here? Are you supporting your mother? Lena stepped up to the microphones. I held my breath. She took a deep breath and spoke, her voice shaking but clear. My name is Lena Blake, she said, correcting him. I I was afraid for a long time, but what happened to my grandmother was wrong, and I choose to speak the truth. I'm here to stand with my sister." She grabbed my arm and held on. A public declaration. It was, in many ways, the most powerful victory of the day. The consequences were swift. The pieces fell, one by one. The district attorney, armed with the probate court's ruling, Richard's sworn testimony, the Northline audit, and Lena's corroboration, unsealed the criminal indictment. While Marla was still reeling in her lawyer's office, a marshal served her. She was formally arrested and charged on 3 felony counts: forgery, conspiracy to commit fraud, and elder abuse. The Marla Cares Foundation, now the subject of a state-level investigation, was forcibly dissolved by the Attorney General's office. Its few remaining assets, a pitiful sum of around $4,000, were seized and transferred back to the Blake Harbor Trust. My father, true to his word, disappeared. He published a full-page, handwritten letter in the local paper. It was a raw, agonizing confession of weakness, of his fear, of his desire for an easy life, and how it had made him blind. He offered no excuses. He asked only for the community's forgiveness and announced his immediate resignation from every board and social position he held. He was, in an instant, a ghost. 2 weeks later, the community came together to erase the stain of the first funeral. The First Presbyterian Church, its own board deeply ashamed, held a new memorial service for Evelyn Blake. It was not a somber, stifled affair. It was a celebration. The church was overflowing, filled with light and music. Ruth Caro asked me to speak. I stood at the lectern where Marla had banned me. I looked out at the faces of the town, at Ruth, at Lena, at Mr. Calloway. I put my digital recorder on the podium, a silent testament, and I finally delivered the eulogy I had written. I spoke of my grandmother's strength, her love for the lake, her sharp wit, and her belief that you must protect what you build. There was not a dry eye in the house. The following Monday, I received a call from Jasper Klein. The board had formally accepted my conditions for the new trust oversight, and they had another offer. "Rowan," he said, his voice respectful, "the board would like to formally invite you to serve as a non-executive ethics and integrity advisor for all our corporate philanthropy, pro bono. Of course, we need a moral compass. We need someone to remind us what our name is supposed to mean. We need Evelyn Steele. We need you." I accepted. Amira called me that afternoon. She had just gotten the notification from the court clerk. "The judge set the sentencing date for Marla," Amira said. "When is it?" I asked. She told me the date. I paused, a cold, slow recognition dawning. It was October 22nd, the day my grandmother Evelyn had married my grandfather, the day the Blake family, and the fortune she had built, had truly begun. It was poetic justice. Marla's end would be marked by Evelyn's beginning. The cycle was complete, the night before the sentencing. I did not go back to the hotel. I drove out to the lake, the small wooded plot of land that Marla had tried to liquidate for fast cash. The realtor's sign was long gone. In its place, Ruth Caro had planted a simple, carved oak marker, future home of the Evelyn Blake Preserve. The air was sharp, smelling of pine and cold water. I had brought something with me from the house. It was the large, gilt-framed portrait of Evelyn that had stood by her casket, the one with the scratches on the back panel, the ugly marks of Marla's desperate prying. I had spent the afternoon in a borrowed workshop. I carefully sanded the splintered wood, smoothed the deep gauges, and restained the gilt finish until the damage was gone. The frame was whole again. I carried the portrait to the center of the property, leaning it against the base of the great oak tree Evelyn had loved. I stepped back. She looked out over the water, regal and calm. It was where she belonged. The next morning, the criminal courtroom was a different animal. This was not the quiet, procedural probate hearing. This was a sentencing. It was theater, and it was packed. The press from Chicago and the local papers lined the walls. The community was there, a sea of faces, neighbors, former scholarship kids, the people Evelyn had championed, in the back row. I saw Jasper Klein and Sloan Ritter from the Northline board. They were not there as directors. They were there as witnesses to the final act. Marla entered, flanked by her lawyer. She had made one last attempt at stage production. She was dressed in a muted, expensive-looking gray dress, her hair pulled back. It was a costume of penitence, of modesty. She even managed a small, brave, trembling smile for the press. The picture of a woman wronged, a victim of circumstance. It did not work. The evidence I had collected, the testimony Amira had secured, the newspaper reports, they had built an invisible wall around her, a wall of facts. She sat, her mask of tragic victimhood already looking cheap and brittle under the harsh fluorescent lights. The judge asked the prosecutor for a final statement. The DA, a sharp woman named Elise, stood. "Your Honor," she said, her voice clear and carrying, "the defense has spent this entire trial attempting to frame this as a family dispute. They have painted the defendant as a loving, if perhaps overwhelmed, affair who simply made procedural errors. They argue her intent was to manage, not to steal. We find that argument unconvincing." Elise turned to the clerk. "The state would like to play one final item for the court, as it pertains directly to the defendant's criminal intent. Audio file, R. Signing Convo, MP3. Marla, who had been staring straight ahead, went rigid. Her lawyer jumped to his feet. "Objection. Your Honor, this is prejudicial. It's already, overruled," the judge said, her voice flat. "The court will hear it." The speakers hissed. The silence in the room was absolute, a held breath. First, my father's voice, muffled, weak, full of doubt. "I don't know. Marla, this feels wrong. My mother, she would never—" And then, Marla's, the voice I heard in my nightmares, cold, sharp, and dominant. "Your mother is not here. I am your wife. I am the one trying to save this family while you hide in your office. I've done all the work. All you have to do is what you do best. Sign the paper. Just sign it. I'll do the rest." The audio clicked off. The silence that followed was heavy, complete. It was the sound of a conspiracy laid bare. It was the sound of her own voice, her own intent, convicting her more thoroughly than any legal argument. She had written, directed, and starred in her own downfall. She stared, unblinking, at the polished wood of the defense table. Her mask was gone. The judge looked down at her. Her expression was not one of anger, but of profound, clinical contempt. "Ms. Dane," the judge began, "you were placed in a position of sacred trust. You were the caregiver for an elderly, vulnerable woman in her final days, and you weaponized that trust. You used her vulnerability not as a shield to protect her, but as a sword to steal from her. You committed forgery, you committed fraud. You systematically dismantled her legacy, her finances, and her medical care for one reason: greed. This was not a misunderstanding. This was not a procedural error. This was a predatory, calculated campaign." Marla's lawyer had argued for probation, citing her community work with her charity. The prosecutor had asked for 5 to 7 years in prison. The judge delivered a sentence that was smarter and crueler than simple jail time. "This court sentences you to 3 years, suspended," she said. Marla's lawyer almost smiled. "That sentence is suspended," the judge continued, her voice like steel, "on the condition of 5 years of intensive, supervised probation, during which you will surrender your passport. Furthermore, this court orders you to pay full financial restitution to the Blake Harbor Trust in the amount of $650,000. A collective gasp went through the courtroom. It was the exact number Sal and I had calculated. The insurance policy, the vibrational healing invoices, the money laundered through Dane events. It was an amount that would shatter her. "And finally the judge said, leaning forward, "this court issues a permanent injunction. Marla Dane is hereby, and forever, banned from serving in any capacity, paid or volunteer, as a board member, officer, administrator, or agent for any nonprofit or charitable organization in the state of Illinois. You built your reputation on the idea of charity. Ms. Dane, now, you may not even volunteer to serve coffee at one. It was a masterpiece. It was not a prison sentence, which would have been finite. It was a social execution. She was stripped of her identity. She could never rebrand. She could never play the philanthropist again. In the only world she cared about, she was erased. Before the judge could adjourn, a voice came from the back. "Your Honor?" My father. He stood, his hands clasped behind his back. He was not required to be there. "Mr. Blake, I just wanted to state, for the record," he said, his voice quiet but clear, "that I support this court's ruling completely. My passivity, my silence, was a profound failure of character. I have already, as you know, resigned my positions. I have requested to the new board of the Blake Harbor Trust that I be allowed to perform my court-ordered community service, not picking up trash, but as a volunteer, working for the fund. I want to spend whatever time I have left trying to repair what I helped break." The judge looked at him for a long moment. "A wise decision. Mr. Blake, the court so orders it." This time, when I walked out onto the courthouse steps, I was not alone. The sun was bright, blinding. Lena was on one side, her hand locked in mine. Ruth Caro was on the other. The press swarmed, microphones and cameras forming a chaotic wall. Before they could shout, I held up my hand. I had a statement. "Today," I said, my voice carrying over the noise, "the Blake Harbor Trust is reborn. To ensure that what happened to my grandmother can never happen again, we are enacting the Evelyn Charter. From this day forward, any change to the Trust's bylaws or asset structure will require a majority vote from a 5-member community oversight board, and the Trust's complete, line-item audits will be posted publicly online every quarter. My grandmother believed in this community. We are putting her trust back in their hands." At the same time, Northline Atlas released its own press statement. They had formally signed the new Evelyn Blake Code of Philanthropic Ethics, the one I had drafted. It required absolute transparency in corporate giving and banned any officer or their family from having any financial connection to a recipient entity. The statement concluded with a quiet note that 2 other senior executives, the ones on the charitable committee who had approved my father's requests, had chosen to resign to pursue other opportunities. The house was clean. A reporter pushed his microphone past the others. Rowan, you've won. Marla is ruined. Do you have any final words for her? Anything you want to say to her right now?" I paused. I thought of the slap in the cold vesting room. I thought of the blood on my lip. I thought of her sneering face, telling me I will crush you. I looked directly into the lens of the nearest camera. "At my grandmother's funeral," I said, my voice clear and cold. The response to violence and to theft was, "This isn't the time." What I have learned, what this whole process has proven, is that is a lie. It is always the time to speak the truth. It is always the time to demand accountability. I looked past the camera, as if I could see her. So, to her, I say this. You used to say, "Not this time, but this, right now. This is the time. This is the time for the truth. This is the time to pay for what you did. This is the time we restore Evelyn's name. And this is the time we finally close that door." It was over. As the press backed away, scribbling in their notepads, I felt Lena hug me, hard. "You did it," she whispered. "You really did it." Ruth Caro stepped in front of me. She didn't hug. She just looked at me. Her eyes, usually so fierce, now soft. She pressed something small and hard into my palm. I opened my hand. It was a simple, dark wooden brooch, carved in the shape of a willow leaf. It was the one Evelyn had worn on her favorite shawl every winter. "She wanted you to have this," Ruth said, her voice thick with emotion. "She told me, 'Give it to her when she's earned it. My girl, you've earned it.'" That afternoon, I did not drive back to Chicago. I drove to the town library. I went to the small, quiet reading room in the back, the one the Blake Harbor Trust had funded 40 years ago. The paint was peeling. The sign on the door faded. When I arrived, someone was already there. My father. He was in old jeans and a faded sweatshirt, a baseball cap pulled low. He had a drop cloth spread on the floor and was quietly, meticulously, painting the walls a warm, bright white. He was starting his community service. He had already taken the old, tarnished brass plaque off the door. A new, freshly carved oak sign sat on a small table, waiting to be hung. It said, simply, Evelyn's room. He saw me. He nodded, once, and then turned back to his work. We didn't need to speak. The silence, for the first time in my life, was not heavy with lies. It was just the quiet sound of work. I had brought something with me, a new, simple, black wooden frame. Inside it was a perfect, clean copy of the Trust's original charter from 1995. I walked to the wall next to the doorway and hung it. The frame was perfect. There were no scratches on the back. My father painted. I straightened the charter. The window was open, and the wind from the lake, from Evelyn's land, blew into the room. It smelled of clean paint and promise. I closed my eyes, and I sent one last thought out into the world, a final memo to my grandmother. I put it all back, Grandma. I put it all back where it belonged, not to make them hurt, but to finally let the truth be at rest. Thank you all so much for listening to this story. I would love to connect with you. Please drop a comment below and let me know where in the world you are listening from, and share your thoughts on the story. Be sure to subscribe to Lila Revenge Stories and like this video, and if you can, please support us by hitting the hype button so this story can be heard by even more people.